Gautam Banerjee, thank you very much for being with us today. Let's talk about Asia's place in the world in light of economic events in the last few months. What do you see as the fundamental issues, challenges, problems facing this part of the world?
I think the last few years have been years where China, India, and a number of other Asian countries have been in the spotlight. They've really come out of their shell. They've performed well economically. I mean, there've been the famous sort of BRIC countries where you've got India, you've got China, and I think it's very clear that economic growth in Asia is going to be something which will far outstrip Europe and North America. I mean, there are various reasons for it, and I think this financial crisis, in some ways, is a tipping point. I think it will get people to re-examine the U.S. model, the U.S. way of doing things in the financial world, and it may well, get people to focus a little bit more on Asia, because already people are saying that, okay, we're in for a long haul now. It'll take maybe a couple of years for things to settle down, and when things settle down, it'll be countries like China and India which will bounce back quicker. Because of the fundamental strengths of those economies. I mean, high savings rate, young population, good sort of cost structures in terms of competing in the global business. So I think this gives Asia a unique opportunity to actually level up.
But if I can just ask you, specifically, if you look at China or even Vietnam, with their main trading partner being the United States, and with the U.S. now in recession, I think most people agree. And already we're seeing a knock-on effect of the factories closing, the economy slowing, especially in China, well, Vietnam as well. How can you be so confident that the brightest days are not far away for these countries in Asia? I mean, they are severely affected by what's happening.
No, I agree. I mean, in the short term, there will be pain for everyone, because I mean, particularly for China, which has a very export-oriented economy, less so for India, which has a very large domestic economy. The export focus is not as much, except of course in services. I mean, the Indian IT companies have a lot of international clients. Many of them are in Europe and North America. But I think this problem may well give them an opportunity, because there will be more people will again look at business models more from an economic and cost point of view, and may give more opportunities to to the sort of BPO and knowledge outsourcing businesses. I mean, that may well come up for discussion. At the same time, there could be some political backlash, because people in the US and Europe are losing jobs, so do we still need to export jobs back to it is very clear that for the next 1 year to 2 years we are actually entering a very uncertain time. But I think the resilience of these economies, I mean, I think China, India will have to reposition. I mean, China, for example, has got huge reserves. I mean, it's got a tremendous amount of financial resources at its disposal. Will probably start looking at its own domestic economy. There will be more spending, particularly in those provinces which are backward from an economic point of view. So I think there will be spending on infrastructure, spending on boosting the domestic economy. That will give China a boost, and I think India will probably also do the same. I mean, India's economy is more domestic anyway. I mean, it's the international component of the Indian economy is much less than China's.
Will China remain the workshop after all this happens? I mean, if we're looking at, let's say, 12 to 18 months of pain, on the way down, what is going to fundamentally change? As I mentioned, we've already seen the factory closings, and clearly there's going to be more of that. Will the basic work structure of China change in that time period? Will it have to modify itself and grow in a different direction? For example, a more service-oriented economy, for example.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think for a start, there will be a big pain that you have already mentioned. I mean, factories closing down because orders are being cancelled. So I think you have to redirect large numbers of the workforce to different areas of productive work.
And where can they realistically go at this point in China's growth cycle? Let's put it that way.
Well,
is there any place for them to go?
Well, I think many of them will get redirected into some of their own sort of infrastructure building, so on. And the Chinese political system is such that you have to look after your people. I mean, even it's very interesting in the Western style economy. When a company doesn't do well, it folds up, people are unemployed. Well, already China is saying, well, we can't make so many people unemployed because the political cost of that is going to be difficult to handle, because the political system is such that you've got to look after your people. You moved away from the fundamental communism way of doing things, but at the same time, I think the Chinese government cannot afford to have large numbers of people suddenly thrown out of work and not being able to be gainfully employed. So they will definitely recalibrate the economy, position it differently, such that there is employment for these individuals. And it could be on, say, the provinces which require more infrastructure, more development. I think money will be, because the Chinese government is not short of money, it will just direct funds into those areas, create employment, more education, more schools. And I think this is an opportunity for China to come up from just being a low-cost place to starting building some brands, some good quality companies. There are already companies poised to take on that, So I think you'll see more investment in that area, more investment in people, in systems, in processes, because you're going to take a breather from the sort of formula which has helped fuel China's growth for the last 10, 15 years of just producing and selling to the US. So it'll perhaps in some ways it'll do what India has done. It'll move into the service sector. It'll move into more knowledge businesses. So I see that shift happening in this next few years.
China and India, who will the winners and losers be, and why, in the next 2 years in this part of the world?
Well, I think the big sort of question mark of course, the big economy is Japan. I mean, Japan, I think, has really got to see whether it can take this opportunity. It lost its way some years back, and even though it's still the second largest economy, very good in certain things, manufacturing, innovation. I mean, I think when it comes to manufacturing, I don't think anyone can beat the Japanese. I mean, they're writing the rules on how things should be built. I mean, but they are again facing the problems of the financial crisis. I mean, I hear Toyota, the world's largest company, is already cutting back on its forecasts. And so I think the Japanese will be severely tested to see if they can make the most out of this crisis. I think in terms of the smaller economies will find it a challenge. I mean, the smaller economies in Southeast Asia will find it a challenge, because they don't have the advantage of China and India of having large domestic economies. So they've been dependent on exporting things out. So now how are they going to weather the storm where they can't really export, but their domestic economy is also not very large. So they could be the losers in the short term until they find a way out for this.
Indonesia has been curiously not so affected by recent events. Do you think that will change? Will they feel a knock-on effect, or are they relatively insulated because of less exposure to the other side?
I don't think anyone is insulated, Glenn. I mean, this world is so connected now. I think Indonesia has perhaps not felt it as much, again, because of its large domestic base. I mean, there are, and it's not so much of a commodity economy anymore. So I think it's more broad-based. But Indonesia has its own set of issues. I mean, there's just so many people who are struggling in Indonesia. So to lift them up and bring them up in terms of their living standards is going to be an issue. And of course, they have an election coming up. That's the interesting thing in this part of the world. We have just so many impending political changes. You've got a general election in India next year. You've got an Indonesian election. Thailand is in a bit of flux. Malaysia is possibly going to go through a change in the leadership. So all of this political change at a time when your economy is going to be affected is being affected by the global crisis, as well as the very challenging environment that everyone is going to experience, because no one is sure who's going to, what the new economic order is going to be. So there's this uncertainty, and no one likes uncertainty. Markets don't like it, investors don't like it. So I think it's going to be testing time. But I just feel that a place like Singapore, which is really a very international and very global economy. I think it'll be very interesting to see how we weather this storm. I feel that Singapore...
That brings me to an interesting question, as I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you, as a nominated member of Parliament, one of the key pillars of the Singapore strategy, as it's been stated in recent years, has been the increase in tourism and driving that part of that sector. With the airlines now having decrease in revenues and decrease in ridership, fewer people transiting through Singapore, the integrated resorts now delayed, cost issues, and obviously a lot of other economic issues related to current events. How is Singapore going to be impacted by some of those sectors that will not perform as well as had been hoped?
Yeah, I think Singapore has also a challenging period ahead. We've already cut back our forecasts down to almost between 2 and 4%, I think, for next year. But I think Singapore today is in a much better position than it was 5 years ago, simply because we diversified our economy. When the 97 crisis, we still hadn't diversified our economy. It was too much dependence on electronics. Now, even if you look at the manufacturing sector, there's a fair amount of diversification out of just electronics. We've got a good pharmaceutical sector, petrochemical. We've got, our foreign direct investment commitments over the last 2 years have been phenomenal. Last year we had something like 16 billion US dollar, 16 to 17 billion US dollar commitments, and across a wide range of very high-end manufacturing, solar energy to petrochemical complexes. Many of these are committed, and they are going to go ahead, regardless of what's happening in the short term. So ExxonMobil is setting up this huge petrochemical plant, largest of its kind. And I think that's going to create a bit of a buzz and the multiplier effect of say a $5-6 billion investment. So that sector is good. The whole knowledge sector. We've got a very holistic strategy of trying to get talent into Singapore. So we said if you want to get talent, you have to have world-class educational institutions. So institutions like INSEAD, Chicago Business School has a graduate program here, the Duke University Medical School. These things will attract talent, because at the end of the day, I think for a small place like Singapore, we have to have the best brains around. This whole thing about the research stuff that we are doing along Biopolis, getting medical research, Duke is one pillar to it. So you get bright people to come and study here. Hopefully some of them will decide to stay and work in Singapore, and that way you increase your intellectual capital. And I think that strategy, I think, will hopefully mean that we keep having really talented people coming and anchoring themselves in Singapore. The service sector is obviously financial services is a big sector. We're going to have some fallout there. But I think again, if you see what Singapore has been trying to do, is trying to build bridges with China, build bridges with India, build bridges with the Middle East. And many of the Middle East countries actually have followed the Singapore model. And many of their leaders, both economic leaders as well as the political leaders, they have been coming to Singapore, and the Singapore government has been sharing the Singapore success story with them in a way that has built some trust and friendship between the Middle Eastern countries and Singapore, which I think is also going to be good, because it means that you're plugged into the the Middle Eastern Middle East countries who are perhaps looking to again diversify their investments, not all going to the West. If they're looking at investments in this part of the world, indeed, we have seen a large number of Middle Eastern buyers of businesses in Singapore. They've come in and bought out a couple of listed companies in the marine sector. They're looking at other sectors. So I think as long as we create this sort of different people coming into Singapore, investing, looking at things for the longer term, I think Singapore will do well. And I think we don't need very many. We're a small country, so we don't need very many of these large investments to keep us going. But I do agree with you that in the short term, many of the things that we had set as targets, for example, the 10 million tourist level last year, was a benchmark that we hit, but this year we are probably not going to hit 10 million. We're going to come down. So in the short term, there will be issues, and I think the test will be for us to see how agile and flexible we are with our policies and with our economic direction.
Let me take a little bit larger issue, not specifically related to Singapore, but you've talked passionately about governance and ethics in business. And we've seen through the financial services industry and the meltdown that has been some severe impediments or problems in the ethical treatment of business and business dealings. What is the way forward to reinstill or to shore up that sense of ethical behavior among business leaders, among businessmen at every level, to make sure that some of these issues don't reoccur?
Well, you can't fix this overnight. It's something which we have to do a few things straight away. I think there must be a concerted effort right at the top. Political leaders, business leaders, going public about saying that this is an issue about culture and about ethics more than anything else. I mean that we have to do the right thing. I mean, and right thing for all stakeholders, not just the company management or employees or company shareholders, but everybody, customers, the society at large, civic society, whatever.
Does there need to be global agreement on what good ethics are?
I think there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, let's have some sort of business is global, so ethics must be also global. And I think we have to we perhaps have to look at the model of what sort of people are regulating our financial sector. I mean, are we getting some bright people to be out the regulator? Because being a regulator is never going to be an easy job, because the best and brightest will be out there innovating, coming up with new products, and so I think this thing which we talked about earlier today about business schools agreeing to that there should be a code of ethics, that the people, the brightest people who go out to business, that just like a doctor, they will not sell something to a patient that doesn't work. I mean, here what happened is that they knew it wouldn't work, and they just did it. And why did they do it? I mean, that's a very fundamental question. Why did they do it? I mean, when you know that you're giving a loan that is not going to be repaid, and then taking to task someone in your organization who is pointing that out to you, and he said, sorry, I don't believe it, you have to give this person the loan, and then if you stand up and say, I don't want to do it, you're demoted or you're passed over for promotion, whatever. I think one has to ask, why did this happen? High performance culture has to be re-examined. What do we mean by high performance culture? High performance culture, I mean, I'm all for it. I mean, we want people to perform, but you have to define what performance is. Performance is not just meeting sales targets. It's about development which is sustainable, it's about developing people, it's developing systems, keeping the brand alive, so that when you leave the organization, it's in a better state than when it was when you joined the organization. These are the things that have to be inculcated. We became too narrow in what is performance.
Gautam Banerjee, we have to leave it there, but thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much.